Hi, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology. It is Monday, April 13th, and today I'm going to take some time to answer a question that I get year-round and have actually never made a video about. This is also a part of my desire to start trying to answer more basic questions that newcomers to my channel or newcomers to astrology have in general. It's easy to for me to just dive into talking about the planetary transits and the spiritual philosophy of astrology and so forth, but there's also so many really super basic questions that people have that I think it's really interesting to hear the answers to, especially if you're like, I'm interested in astrology, but I have so many beginners questions. So I think this is kind of a question that everybody has at some point. And usually in the first, I'd say year, maybe two or studying, you learn the answer to pretty quickly. But if you're brand new, it can be hard to find a really solid answer to this question. And the question is, why don't I feel like my sun sign? Why don't I identify with or resonate with my sun sign? Yeah, I probably get it 30, 40 times a year. So I decided it would be a good time to make a video on it. So first of all, if that's you, if you have ever experienced this, you're like, I just don't feel like I resonate so much with my sun sign. There's some really good explanations for why you may not resonate with your sun sign. I hope you'll find this useful. So the first explanation, I'm going to put a chart up on the screen so that you can see this. The first explanation is, of course, really, really basic, but it really can't be, the importance of this response can't be underestimated. And that is that you are more than your sun sign. A lot of people, when they first get into astrology, they're used to seeing their sun sign in magazine horoscopes or newspaper horoscopes, or online you're used to reading maybe a paragraph about your month ahead or something, your week ahead or the day ahead somewhere according to your sun sign. So in the modern era of astrology, sun sign astrology has become, very, very popular, but it's not traditional. It's not traditional in the sense that, nobody in thousands of years of astrology would ever say that to understand yourself through the language or lens of astrology, you just look at your sun sign. So as you can see the chart on the screen right now, let's just say that this were a birth chart. There's a huge number of factors. I just have the traditional 7 up right now. I don't have the outer planets because I practice Hellenistic astrology. When I practice with birth charts, I look at whole sign houses, just the traditional 7 for starters, with the nodes of the moon, a lot of fortune. So when you're looking at this chart, you'll notice right away, right, that there are many different factors in a birth chart that an astrologer is looking at. Not only your sun sign, here we have Aries, but the moon today is in Capricorn. So if you're born right now, you'd have a sun in Aries, moon in Capricorn. This is a last quarter moon in Capricorn. So the sun and the moon position matter, as does the phase of the moon when you are born. As does the ascending sign. Well, if you were born right now, you'd have Cancer rising with the moon in Capricorn in the 7th house, with the sun in Aries in the 10th. So those 3 factors alone have already significantly complexified the interpretation of some of the most universal symbols in a birth chart. But there's more. So we would also, in this case, be interpreting your Cancer rising, not just by virtue of, say, the ascending sign in Cancer, and that means your personality is like this, but we would be interpreting according to the fact that the north node of the moon is there, that the moon, the ruler, is debilitated in its exile in the 7th house in a conjunction with the south node of the moon. Be looking at the fact that there's an exalted sun in Aries in the 10th house. So dignity matters, which is to say the position of the planet in a sign and what kind of strength or weakness the planet might have. And what that basically means is how easily a planet can express its own natural significations, its own natural symbolism. When you put a planet in, like, say, like the moon in Capricorn, it's in Saturn's sign. The moon has a tricky relationship with Saturn, and so it's considered to be a kind of tension that the moon has. So you see all of these different kinds of factors. For people who are very brand new to astrology, you may not know this. People who have practiced astrology for a while, I'm preaching to the choir, but I get this question so often, and this is the basic answer, is that your chart is really sophisticated. And also, like in this chart, for example, Venus, the goddess of love, is in the 12th house in Gemini. Mars and Saturn are in Aquarius in the 8th house. Jupiter is in its fall in Capricorn in the 7th house. You have the midheaven pretty closely conjoined with a lot of fortune in Pisces in the ninth. Mercury is a morning star in Aries in the 10th. Not only that, but this is a daytime chart. There's huge differences in ancient astrology between whether you were born at day, during the daytime, or during the nighttime, which will empower certain planets. For example, if you're born during the daytime, the sun, Jupiter, and Saturn will be in sect. It's like the political party in power, versus the nighttime planets, the moon, Jupiter, the moon, Venus, and Mars. If you were born during the nighttime, those planets would be in power. Mercury will change sect, nighttime or daytime, based on what position it's in. Is it oriental, meaning is it a morning star, or is it occidental? Is it an evening star? What sign was it in, masculine or feminine? So there's so many different factors. The house position matters. Aspects also matter. For example, if you were to, in this chart, if you're to interpret the meaning of the moon in the chart, you have to interpret the meaning of the moon as it is also moving into a square with the sun. That's the last quarter moon that I mentioned. You can't, in other words, nothing exists in a vacuum in astrology. And so most people, when they say I don't resonate with my sun sign, what they really mean is what they don't understand yet is that there is a whole chart that has to be interpreted. So that's just like a little reason. That's like a very basic reason, but there's even more. For example, when you're looking at a birth chart, not a lot of people know that the sun and the moon may not even necessarily play the biggest role in a chart. Let me give you an example. So if I progress this chart just a little bit, and I start putting I advance the chart, and then I put the lights into the ninth and the sixth house. So now the sun and the moon are in the ninth and the sixth house. These places were traditionally called cadent. Now the sun is pretty happy in the ninth house, so it's a little bit of an exception. But one thing that I want to draw your attention to is this. Notice that as soon as I switch this about an hour forward, or someone were born at this time, they now have Saturn in the seventh house in its own sign of Aquarius, where it's very strong, exactly conjoined to that DS, which is the degree of the Western horizon. For a person that is born with such a chart, Saturn can easily become the most dominant planet in the chart. Mars could become more dominant as well, because planets that are in angular houses, 1, 10, 7, and 4, will stand out. Imagine you have a 12-card tarot spread, and that there are 4 positions, right, that have the power in the circle. So if a card is in that position, it's really strong. You may not have like, to make an analogy, you may not have a major arcana card in the 7th place in one of the sort of angular places in the tarot spread. You might have the 10 of Wands, or you might have the 6 of Cups, or something like that. But that place, that card, just because it's, a suited card, not a major arcana, may become even more important than a major arcana that is in a lesser position of power within a tarot spread, right? So that's a similar idea in astrology, that a planet that is angular can become more prominent, even if it's not one of the big 3 that astrologers have typically looked at over thousands of years: your sun, your moon, and your rising sign. But okay, so that's just to give you like a quick taste. If you're new to astrology, of course, you're not going to understand what all of that means. And that's why you need an astrologer in order to understand what all of that means. So the second answer is that a lot of people don't resonate with their sun signs because they don't know how complex their chart is. And also because they don't know how to read their chart. And some people, of course, you keep studying and you're going to learn, and there's a lot of resources available online. But I have to say that as someone who started off my career self-taught, and then I had some teachers here and there, and then teachers became more and more important to me as I progressed, because I realized you can learn a certain amount on your own online, but then at a certain point, it's like you're fishing through so many things, and you need someone to help you organize and sort of consolidate and clarify your understanding of how to read charts, because there's so many factors at play, and there's so many different opinions and thoughts out there about what they all mean and so forth. So yeah. So at any rate, it does help at some point to have an astrologer read your chart, or to take an astrology course of some kind, because then at the very least, you're getting consistent use of craft. And when you see, an economy of craft, an astrologer who has certain tools and methods that they use, and they have an easy way of explaining it, and they do it the same way over and over again, and they work with clients, using the same kinds of tools. I mean, this is why astrologers, for example, like Stephen Forrest, who's a great evolutionary astrologer, who's basically sort of packaged his approach, and because he refined it over many years, and has been wildly popular in terms of an astrological mentor for people because it's such an accessible approach. And I in that regard, I can't recommend highly enough that if you're sitting there going, I love astrology, but I don't feel like I resonate with some of the things I've heard about my chart or even just my sun sign or whatever, start studying it, find a class at some point, and also get a reading, get not just one reading, but get a few reading from a few different astrologers. Take a few courses from people and kind of feel out which system or which approach works the best. But one of the main reasons people don't resonate with their sun sign is because they don't know how complex it is, and they don't know how to read it for themselves, even if they have some inkling of how complex it is. So at any rate, those are sort of the first two explanations. Now, look at my list here. Let's talk about the meaning of the sun, the moon, and the ascendant in traditional astrology. So the sun, the moon, and the rising sign have been hugely important for astrologers for thousands of years. It's never been just the sun, and it's never been just the moon or anything like that. It's always sort of the trifecta of sun, moon, rising. But there's many other things that are taken into consideration, as I mentioned earlier, like angular planets or the phase of the moon or the prenatal lunation, which the last newer full moon that came before your birth is analyzed. So many different things. But the sun, I like this analogy. I think it works really nicely. The sun has a lot of people unfortunately think that the sun has a lot to do with one's ego and one's sense of self, and so therefore it should describe my personality. But actually, no, the sun makes an arc in the sky from rising to setting, right? And so the sun is better understood as one's path. You could think of it like the plot line in a movie, or let's say a stage play. It's the plot. Now, the plot, for some people, depending on how that plot line of the sun sign and the house position of the sun and aspects to the sun and the dignity of the sun, how the sun relates to other things in the chart might make a person more personally identified with the themes of the plot line. But in general, it's better to think of the sun as the kind of narrative arc or trajectory of the story of one's life. And some people, my story is not the same as who I am. Right? Sometimes there's difference between the two. There's a certain amount of overlap, but there's also some distinction. The moon, on the other hand, is like the set. Let's say, let's say you have a plot line and the plot line is a love story, but what's the setting? What's the set like? Well, it's the plague in, medieval Europe, or it's let's say it's the Vietnam War. Or let's say that it's it's like the Sopranos. You have a love story, but it's being set in the midst of a mafia family. You know what I mean? So the moon is going to give you the picture of the environmental, circumstantial conditions, everything from like heredity and genetics and sort of the family and community that you grow up in, but also environmental constants that describe sort of the atmosphere or mood, and circumstantial realities that are going to come in and have a big influence on the plot line, and vice versa. So think of the moon. It also has a very personal, when you're looking at these things psychologically, the moon is a part of our temperament and the analysis of our mind and even our health in ancient astrology. But the moon in a broader sense as a universal symbol in the chart really represents those environmental factors. They don't necessarily feel like they're in our control, but they contribute in some very immediate way to the plot line. And sometimes the environment is the plot line, right? Like, you think about a movie like a story like Les Mis. If you guys know the musical Les Mis. So Les Mis set in the French Revolution, right? So the circumstances and the plot are basically one and the same, right? So sometimes in charts, you also have a way of understanding the way in which the environment that the moon depicts sort of takes over the plot line and becomes so infused with the plot line that the two are in some ways inseparable. So the moon can overlap quite a bit with the sun in this respect. But that's a simple way of understanding their difference. And then finally, if you want to look for something that has a lot to do with personality and psychology, you actually look at the ascendant. The ascending sign in ancient astrology, the sign that's rising in the east when you're born, when you're coming out of the mother's womb, there's something else, the stars and planets and a sign in the east is rising and appearing from beneath the horizon of the earth. So just as you're coming out of a dark place to be seen, something else was rising in the east to be seen. And that sign and any planets in that place, in the rising place, as well as the ruler of that ascending sign, all of those things are used to understand temperament, personality, one's dharma, one's sense of essence as a being, who I am as spirit and soul. The ancient astrologers didn't think your first house and rising sign was just a mask, just a persona. They ascribed to the first house your vitality, your health, your spirit, and your soul. And also temperament. Part of the analysis of temperament and psychology and behavior will be related to the ascendant ruler planets in the first. Now, ancient astrologers also looked at the moon and Mercury very particularly to get an understanding of psychology or temperament. So there's some overlap between, the moon as, say, environmental karmic condition factors that color the plot line, and also overlap with the character. And that makes sense because we are a product of our environment, from our heredity, our genetics, our psychology, and actual external circumstances in the environment. So the moon kind of overlaps with both describing the environment of the soul and the body and mind, and describing the external environment. And the sun, again, is like the plot line. Now, the three don't have to be divided really, really, severely. There's overlap always, especially through the phase of the moon, which is to say the moon's relationship with the sun. But those three factors are how we gather the most specific information about a person's overall life path, which sounds like a paradox, but it's true. There are universal significators that we use like this to get a sense of the life as a whole. And we use this combination to get detailed information about the life as a whole. So most people that say, I don't really feel like I resonate with my sun sign, or even on some level, people being like, I've had readings that didn't really stick with me before. A lot of it has to do with, not realizing how complex the chart is, not being able to read it, maybe not getting a reading from someone who really knows how to read it, which unfortunately does happen, or not really understanding the difference between, say, these big symbols, the sun, the moon, and the rising, not really knowing what they do and how they work together to form, to give us information. So the other thing, one of the major reasons that people also don't necessarily resonate with their chart, or they may not resonate with their sun sign in particular, is also because you're not your chart. And this is something that I've repeated many times in many online videos that I've done, but it's worth repeating. For ancient astrologers, the chart was much more of a depiction of your karma. You're a free agent. You know what I mean? Like, you're not just your psychology. You're not just your personality. You're not the things that happen to you, good or bad, right? We are who we discover ourselves to be in response to what the chart is depicting as the karma that we're being born into. In a sense, you can think of the chart as something that's saying, okay, look, this isn't your first rodeo. You're being born into a new body, totally new situation. And the reason that it's set up in the way that it is because you're a free person who has made previous choices in previous lives, and the carryover of those choices, their momentum, that's what we're looking at. It's called a kshetra, or a field. The birth chart is it's like a field of karma. It's like a garden. You're seeing all of these things that are in the process of growing and blossoming at different stages in different areas with different themes. But you're actually not any of it. You are the being walking through all of it, even your own psychology. Haven't you ever had that experience where you're in therapy or you're in counseling, or you're just reflecting and you're going like, wow, who am I? Why am I acting and behaving in this way? That's because we're not even our own psychology, right? So discovering who we are as a spirit soul has to do with how we reflect and respond with our free will, with our creativity, with our spirit and our soul to what the chart describes. So if you feel like on some level, I just don't resonate with this, that also may be because in some ways, modern astrology tends to overly emphasize, this is who you are, this is you, this is your personality, this is your psychology. And there's a real danger in doing that, because even our psychology is not who we are from the standpoint of ancient astrology. Even our psychology is nothing more from the ancient standpoint than like another weather pattern. It's like, oh, I was born into this life with propensity to be, let's say, I'm a Cancer sun, and was born with the full moon, Mercury in Cancer. So I like cozy stuff, right? I'm just making this up. So I do actually like cozy stuff, but I could talk about my kids all the time. So, but that's psychology, right? That's not who I am. That's like the conditioning of the choices that I've made and the things that have appealed to my soul, appearing as a kind of, a spring rainstorm or whatever in my body and in my mind for this lifetime. But psychology also changes, and we have many ways of tracking how our psychology will change and how weather patterns of psychology change in our lives. So sometimes people will say, I'm working on myself. I'm really trying to work out the kinks of my psychology. It's like, well, good luck with that. That's like trying to work out the kinks in the weather patterning. You know what I mean? It's like, so much of ancient astrology is about, how do we move along with all of the aspects of who we are and what we're experiencing that are all really just temporary weather patterns in the karmic world. And when we really establish a sense of peace and happiness within, it's because we have responded soulfully to everything, including our psychology, that's depicted in the birth chart. And in doing that, we also discover our free will, which is really essential if we want to be someone more than just what the birth chart says. It turns out that to really be more than what the birth chart says we also need to be conscious, because when we're not, the birth chart has a lot of power in predicting everything that's going to happen. That's unfortunately a truth. It's like, it's not meant to blame anyone. It's just true. If we don't work on ourselves to become more conscious, we become more predictable. We become just more like we're just aligning with the laws of nature in some ways, and the laws of nature are more bound. So anyway, so you're not your chart. So if you part of you is like, I don't really resonate with my chart, well, good. You know what I mean? Like that's in some ways that could be a sign of something spiritual inside of you that is saying, I don't want to be locked into something. Same thing with personality tests, like, okay, anyway, charts have also been set to different times traditionally. So people think that their chart is more of a blueprint, than it is. Charts have been set to conception. Charts have been set to birth. There's been different ways of calculating birth. For thousands of years, people have not always had super accurate medical record birth times. And so what does that mean? It means that, if you went to see William Lilly, the Renaissance astrologer, and you didn't have your birth time, you're like, I don't even know how old I am, like, you know what I mean? Have you ever been to a Renaissance festival, by the way, and you've just like walked around and imagined like yourself in that kind of world, like maybe 500 years ago or something, just like medieval Europe or something, and you know what I mean? And everyone's bosoms are falling out, and there's flagons of ale, and there's people walking around with swords, and whatever, like, you know what I mean? Like, just it wasn't like that, but if you put yourself into like the medieval headspace, and you go like, how likely is it that Braun the oaf over here understood, like knows exactly what time he was born? You know what I mean? His mom probably whatever, his mom might have been raped by a soldier who God, you know what I mean? Like, God knows what was happening in the medieval times and in other times of the world. Like, it was, and it's not like, well, I don't have my exact birth time, but I know that it was within 3 minutes. Is it going to be like, are we going to get a good rectified chart here? You know what I mean? Like, the problems of the birthing first world in some ways. Anyway, I'm joking, but the truth is that if you walked in and saw William Lilly, he was like, I don't know when I was born. I don't even know how old I was. He would just cast your birth chart for the moment that you walked into the room. There's a whole chapter in his book, his famous medieval textbook on horary astrology called Christian Astrology. The first chapter of that book talks about, look, if people don't have the birth time, here's a method you can use. Cast the chart for the moment they walk in for the reading. That's their birth chart. So, and these work too. I'm not making this up. So charts are looser than we think they are. They're divinatory, and they're meant to describe and depict our karma, not define who you are. So it's very important that you remember that. Okay, so that's what I wanted to share with you today. Some fast and easy ways of explaining why you may not resonate with your sun sign. Now, if you, shameless self-promotion, if you want to learn more about reading birth charts, about taking a class that can give you that structure that I was mentioning earlier, I like to think that my courses are good at doing that. Just graduated a new group yesterday who started last summer. They're in the process of taking their tests right now. The next class starts in June on Sundays. It's called Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic. The early bird rate is in effect right now. You can save $500 when you register. There's a payment plan if you need it. And for anyone struggling because of coronavirus, there's also need-based tuition. 30 classes over the course of a year, 12 guest lectures, tons of optional homework and bonus material, study group. You can email me anytime with questions. We meet live on webinars. If you can't make it live to the webinars, everything is recorded for you and you can attend remotely. So it's a really great program. There's optional certification tests at the end if you want to take it, unless you're just taking the course for personal enrichment, well, which lots of people do. I would love to see some of you there. Hellenistic astrology in particular is very grounding and very structured. It's very good for total beginners. And also, if you are, say, even an intermediate student in modern astrology, but have never had a really deep, grounded look at the classical roots of astrology, I promise you that it will make your practice a lot better, especially when it comes to prediction. So, and nothing in the class will be, everything will be completely new. People always wonder about that, but because some of it, you look at the curriculum on my website and you go like, I know some of this. You don't know it unless you've studied Hellenistic astrology, because it's very different when you go back to the classical roots. So anyway, I hope that you are all having a good week. And remember, I really want to do more, like some videos for total beginners. So which kinds of videos would be helpful for you guys? What kinds of questions do you have as well? Just any Q&A, like more content that we're doing during coronavirus, lockdown time. So if there's any interesting content you'd like me to make, please feel free to hit me up in the comments section below. And also share your insights. When was the first time that you sort of realized that you were more than your sun sign? And if you don't identify with your sun sign as much in your chart, what do you identify with your chart? Which stands out? I'd love to hear from you guys. All right, take it easy, everyone. Bye.